11 people have joined. I just wanted to know, can you just switch on your video and just switch it off one by one? At least 12 students are there. Jaita Naik, right? Okay. Nandini? Nandini Prasad is there? Alia? Nandini, okay, hi. Alia Afrin? Alia Afrin? Then Fasna
Yes,
Shirin?
ma'am.
Fasna Shirin? She's not there. Fasna Shirin, then Mrinalini Shivanathan. Where is your video? I want to share.
Ma'am, I have issue with my video app.
Okay,
Sorry.
fine. Okay, fine. And who are the 4 others? Just show me. I mean, let me know.
Ma'am, I'm there. Chandrima Das.
Okay. Where is your video? I'm not seeing you.
Ma'am, that there's some issue. I'm not able to.
Okay, it's not sure.
Yeah.
Shantosh has joined. And who are these people? Alia Afrin, Chandrima Das, Edward Ferraro, Fasna, Jaita, Nrinalini, Shivanathan, Santosh, Stuti Roy, Vinod Valai. Alia Afrin, from where you are hailed from? Alia Afrin?
Ma'am, I am from Delhi.
You are from Delhi. Achha, you have joined from Delhi.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, but you must be having your counseling class there.
Ma'am, this is the only one.
Oh, this is the only one. I have no idea, right? And Nageshwari. And Edward Ferrao, from where you are? Edward Ferrao?
I am from Mysore, madam.
You
Mysore.
are from Mysore. Okay. I just wanted to know, you just can raise your hands. I just wanted to know how many you had English honors at the BA level. I mean, you're acquainted with literature. Just raise your hands. Okay, Vinod. Then Rajveer. Then Asha, Kajol, and 5 others. Okay. So that's true. Fine. That's fine. Okay. Vijay Jamal. Okay. So today is our first class. Exit Vijay Jamwal. Why it is coming like this? I just wanted to make it full screen. I don't know why it is not going this. Vijay Jamwal is covering most of. Vijay Jamwal, can you just. You have switched off your video, please? Vijay Jamwal, are you covering the screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you just switch off your video, please? I don't know why you're covering the entire screen. Yeah. Now I get it. Yeah. So today we are going to start MEG01, that is the English poetry, British English poetry. And you have 7, 8, 10 volume, 10 blocks you have, right? And I think I have been given 8 classes, out of which I had to miss out one due to my some of my reasons I couldn't do it. So 7 classes we have to complete the course, and as it is a Google thing, I cannot share my screen. I cannot, simultaneously I cannot share my PowerPoint or maybe my notes or whatever it is. So what I can do, I can like switch off my thing only with the audio remaining, and then I can show you whatever it is written. And I would prefer that, like last time what I had done is one of you, as one of the team leaders, had given his WhatsApp number and mail ID also. So if you have a interaction amongst yourself, I can share my PPTs or my notes, whatever I have with me for my class. I can share that with one of your representatives, and that responsibility of the representative is to share it with all his friends. Are you agreeable to this?
Yes, madam.
Okay, because last time it so happened there were students, they said we didn't get it, ma'am. No one shared with us, and so there was a lot of problem. But if I am giving my WhatsApp ID, I'll be loaded with all your messages, which I don't want to. So one of you can give me your WhatsApp, your mail ID. I can send those attachments to them after I complete my class. I can send those attachments to them, whatever I have. Not the full thing I cannot send you, but whatever I have, I can send it so that you can share it amongst yourself. Right? So today we start. Today we start our volume 1. Volume 1, it has got 3 blocks: 1, 2, and 3. I don't know how many of you are having the material also. I'm not very sure. So let me tell you, there are 10 volumes in English poetry, and 1, 2, and 3 are clubbed together. Today I'm going to start 1. And the preliminary part of it, let me little discuss with you, because it usually doesn't come as a question. And after every class, I'll give you 10 minutes so that whatever problem you have, or whether you have registered whatever I said or not, you can discuss that with me, so that we can, I can solve at least all your queries, whatever you have. But they should be genuine queries. Okay, they should be genuine queries. So you can just note them down, and at the end of my class, you can ask me, and I try my best to clear them. Okay, so now we start. First, actually, this block has is grammar of poetry, which is not a very relevant portion, but as it is there in your book, I thought I'll just go through it, not very in a detailed way, but at least to have an idea. You should know what are these terms like, and how do you critically appreciate a poem, what are the features of poetry, and what are the rules. These are the basics. So the basics are there, so I can deal with that. So my audio is I think you can hear me. So what I can do is let me minimize my screen first. Sure. Change exit. I think I can't exit to get it to you. So what I'm going to do is, just a minute. Can you all hear me? At least you can hear me, no?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, fine. So at least you can see whatever I'm showing. Is it visible to you?
No, ma'am.
It's not visible to you, no? I don't know. They have some problem with this Google thing. I'm not able to share my screen. Okay, you can hear me. And today I'm going to teach you the basics of poetry. That's called the grammar of poetry. Poetry is nothing but it is about meter and metrics. One is a meter which in the cloth you go on measuring, and the other is that when you measure the lines of poem, that's called a meter also. And it is derived from the Greek word metron, metron, which means to measure, and it refers to feet. As a human beings of feet, the poems also have feet. The different types of feet they have. I'll explain you. And metrics. What is metrics? Metrics is the study of meter. Metrics is the study of meter. So there are different types of meter in a poem. I don't know whether you've read it in your bachelor's level. One is the iambic meter. When one is the unstressed, the other one is the stressed. Then there's a trochaic meter, where it is the stressed and that is the unstressed. Then it is anapaced, which is two unstressed and one stressed. Dactyl. So there are different types of meters, and the most popular one I tell you is the iambic meter. Please switch off, mute your speakers, please mute your speakers. Some of you are talking, please don't disturb me. Please switch off. And the trochaic, iambic and the trochaic are the most popular meters in English poetry. I will explain you giving some examples, don't have to worry. And the other of the poem, one is the meter and the metrics. The other feature of the poem is the rhyme and rhythm. Rhyme. When one line ends and the next line also ends with the same sound, same pronunciations, everything is the same, like mine, shine, that way. That is called the rhyming. Rhyme, and the other is the rhythm. Rhythm means the music. Poem is nothing but music. It's a flow of words. So it has a musical effect on the ears. And how is the music created? Like in music, you have different ragas, how the cascade, how the music is played. You have different ragas. Similarly, there are different terms in a rhythm. And that helps towards, making the poem sound very musical. For example, alliteration. It is a repetition of same, this the first word is repeated. That is called alliteration. Then assonance, then consonance, then onomatopoeia. These are all the technical terms. And as you critically appreciate a poem, when you appreciate a poem, you have to also hint at the technical part of the poem also, whether it has got a rhyme scheme, how is the rhythm of the poem, what all technical devices, literary devices have been used by the poet. Like what is one is a vowel. What is the other one? We have 5 vowels. And what is the other part of it?
Consonants.
Consonants, ma'am.
So how these consonants are repeated? Alliteration, not the vowel. When the vowels are repeated, it is assonance, So these are the different variety you have to know when you interpret a poem. So this helps to us interpreting your poem. For example, Wait. Let me come back to you again. Yeah. For example, let me read out a particular some lines you could understand. When I talked of meter, the feet of a poem, you always find two type of syllables. One is the stress, one is the unstressed.
Unstressed.
Okay, one stressed, one unstressed. Even in Hindi or in any other regional language, you will find there is always a stressed syllable and there is a unstressed syllable. For example, if in Hindi I say मैं, that is a stress. Nahi, na is stressed, but he is not stressed. मैं nahi, he is just depending on na, right? मैं nahi. Then I said खाऊंगी. The g is here stressed. K and g. But oo, that in the middle part of it, there's oo. That is not stressed. I'm talking of a regional language that is called Hindi. So when I talk of English, for example, let me give an example. I'll just read out first, then I'll give you the example. With ravished ears, the monarch hears. How will I say?
Ma'am,
will I say?
ears and hairs. Ears and hairs.
No, when I say with ravished, I'm putting the stress on whom?
R&D.
R-A-V. So one word is divided into two parts. Ravished. So when R is, just a minute, excuse me. Hello. नहीं मैं Google Meet टा करती हूँ तो मतलब हाँ hello, can you hear me? Can you hear? हाँ hello सुन. Okay, so when I say that with ravished ears, where am I putting the stress? With ravished ears. Where am I putting the stress?
Initial letters
Ravished.
RAV.
No. Just
Ravished.
one second, one phone call is coming. Just give me one.
Ravished.
Hello. हाँ नहीं ମୁଁ ଗୋଟେ Google Meet ଅଛି ଯେ ଆଥର ମୁଁ କେମିତି ତୋଠୁ ଶିଖିଥିଲି ଯେ ପ୍ରେଜେଣ୍ଟେସନ ଟା ସେୟାର କରିକି ତୁ କଣ କରିବାକୁ କହିଥିଲି ମୋତେ ତ ପୁରାଟାକୁ ମିନିମାଇଜ କରିଦେବ ତାପରେ ଆରଟା ଖୋଲିବ. अच्छा ओके ठीक है ओके 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 फाइन ठीक है ओके थैंक यू ओके. When I say with ravished ears, I am putting the stress on with. No, I'm not putting the stress with ravished ears. So I am putting the stress here on R-A-V, rav. I-S-H-E-D, ravished, isht is not stressed. Ears, with ravished ears. So with is unstressed, R-A-V is stressed. Again, I-S-H-E-D, unstressed, ears is stressed. Then I say, the monarch hears. I don't say the monarch hears. I don't say that. I said the monarch. The monarch hears. So the the is not stressed. It is the monarch. I've been putting my stress on M-O-N, monarch. A-R-C-H is not stressed. Monarch hears. Hears is stressed. Then I say, affects to nod. Affects I'm putting the stress on F, F, E, C, T, S. Whereas the first part of it, A, is little slow. Affects, I don't say affect. I don't say that. I said affects. Affects. So F, F, E, C, T, S is stressed. 2. 2 is again, a low key. And then nod. Nod is stressed. So it is one unstressed, stressed. One unstressed, stressed. But trochaic or trochee is just the opposite. It's just the opposite of iambic. For example, I say tiger, tiger. Where is the stress? Ti. I don't say tiger, tiger. I don't say that. I say tiger, tiger. So first stress, then unstress. First stress, then unstress. Tiger, tiger. Burning, burning. I don't say burning. I said burning. Bright, bright. So BRI is stressed. GHT is not stressed. Right? So it is just the opposite of iambic. Unstressed, stressed. And this is stressed, unstressed. So you have to, listen to how one pronounces. You should always listen to how one pronounces. Especially, I would advise you to see or hear the BBC News, because we are following the UK pattern. We are not following the American pattern. American, they speak in a Yankee language. A lot of slangs are there. But the chest English is spoken always by the Britishers. And we are following, it is British poetry, and we are following the British language, British pronunciation. So I would advise you listen to the BBC English News and don't watch who is speaking. Don't watch at that figure. No. What you watch is the lip movement of the speaker. But usually what happens, one is engrossed looking at the reader only. How she looks like, how he looks like, whether he's handsome or whether she's not handsome, that way. As a result, the effect of that speech is lost. So whenever you're listening, listen to the speech, listen and watch the lip movement of the speaker. Okay? So that is how you can also learn good English, learn how to speak good English. And, people have a lot of problems. For example, today you are in MA, tomorrow you might become a teacher. So when you become a teacher, you need to speak good English wherever you are, because you're an English teacher. So that comes very gradually, listening to others, listening to good, good speakers, or BBC News is the best thing, or even the movies, if you can watch the good movies. So you can, the way they pronounce the words, try to imbibe that, try to learn that. Then slowly, you'll find a lot of change when you speak the accent. For example, some people say schedule. Schedule. What is a schedule?
Schedule.
Yeah. But the
Schedule.
word is schedule. So, but generally people say, what is a schedule? For example, divorce. People say divorce. I've been divorced. But generally the word is to be divorced. Right? So these are the how you learned it. The dictionary will only tell you about the spelling or maybe the stress. But only when you listen to a good speaker, then you learn how they are pronouncing those words. And then that is how it gradually comes. Because after all, one should not feel bad because this is a foreign language. And you are mastering a foreign language. It's not our natural thing that we have learned it from a childhood. So one should not, many students feel embarrassed that at my PG level, how do I learn this language? What will others think? What will others feel like if I pronounce in a wrong way? I have been in interviews. I'm seeing the students become very conscious when they speak. And the consciousness comes because they're not very sure whether they're speaking good English or bad English. So only learning the text is not important. How you present, that is also very important for the speaker as well as for the listener, both of them. So these are the types of meters. I gave you examples, and they're also called, another when there is no rhyming at all. When there's no rhyming pattern at all, like the modern poetry, this is like prose. What is it called? It is called blank verse. Blank verse, because it doesn't have any pattern. It doesn't have any meter. The lines don't match. There is no rhyming scheme. But when you
Like Milton?
yeah,
Milton.
no, usually you'll find the blank verse with the modern poets. Milton, he has a blank verse, but at times you'll find some lines rhyming, skimming. There is a meter to that also, because he was also very much influenced by the 18th century poetry. 18th century, he was belonged to the 18th century, so there is a rhyme scheme in his poems also. And he wrote sonnets also. So sonnet has also a rhyme scheme. So, but when you come to the modern poets, for example, take any modern poet, you'll find there's no meter at all. It is just like sounds like prose. I saw a dream. In the air it was. It goes on. It doesn't have any sort of because they say it should be free verse. Why should the poets be restricted and be made conscious that we have to follow a particular pattern? Then only we can write. So whatever comes naturally to you, you write that. Especially blank verse was written in the time of the
Shakespeare.
romantic age also. Some poems, they were very
Shakespeare.
Shakespeare's sonnets, that they had a rhyme scheme. It was the two lines of the end of the poems, whatever he had written. Yes, the romantics, yes, they had a blank verse. For example, if you take Wordsworth, they had a blank verse. So we'll not go into all that. Let me go ahead. So I'm just generally informing you, because this is a technical part of it. And heroic couplet. Heroic couplet was very famous during the 18th century, especially with Alexander Pope and all. They followed a particular hero where the two lines towards the end of it, toward the end of any poem, that two lines is to have a particular rhyme scheme. That was called a heroic couplet. And there are some poems given in your this thing also, poem in your book also. So you can go through because it's not possible to read out each and everything, because I have to first finish all this, or else it
More
becomes...
heroic.
Yes.
More heroic. Dryden.
Yes, Dryden what? They
A
were
more
the
heroic.
No, let me I don't we have to go. Let me go ahead. And different types of poems I've already told you. Ballads, sonnets, and in sonnets also there is the Petrarchan sonnet, where it is divided into two parts of 8 and 6 lines each, octave and sestet. First one was octave, 8 lines, and then was the sestet, 6 lines. That is the Petrarchan sonnet. And one is a Shakespearean sonnet, where it ends with a couplet. And then
Petrarchan sonnet.
And then is the Spenserian sonnet. So there are different types of sonnets also you have. And then you can have the rhythm. Rhythm means with the music, where they use different types of technical things like alliteration, image, simile, and
Metaphor.
all these. It adds to the rhythm of the poem. So this is about the basics of of learning a poem or reading a poem, and it will help you when you critically analyze a poem. It will help you. And there are books like where you have these technical terms also. There are books, so you can get them. And there is one book by Prasad. I don't know whether it's available still or not, but the very book on the forms of poetry, with the different types of sonnets, different types of ballads, elegies. What are the different forms of poetry? These are called the forms of poetry. And then the pattern of poetry, when the technical devices used by, there's a book called Abrahams. There is a book by Abrahams where it deals with all these technicalities of a poem. I think it is what Abrahams, I don't remember, but it is Abrahams. And it is only deals with all these technicalities of a poem. And it is very necessary to understand minimum, don't go into all the details, but at least the basics, what is
Ma'am?
called an irony, what is called an
M.H.
image.
Abraham, huh? M.H.
What-
Abraham.
And let me go one by one. Yes. Yes,
Ma'am,
Haki.
is it the name of the author Abrahams or the title of the book?
It is the name of the author.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Abrahams, you can look at that from the Google.
Okay.
Dictionary of Literary Terms by M.H. Abrahams, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Dictionary of Literary Terms by M.H. Abrahams. So you can see that book. It is a very thin book, and it is have a clarity also when you read that book. So go through that book, different types, what types of literary devices are there. You have a fair idea. They give you the examples. And there are many Indian authors, but I would advise that you can go through Abrahams, and perhaps it might be available in your library. If you don't have any library access, you can also go through maybe your Google also. Ebook must be available there if you can get it, or you can get it. Oh, the free PDF is also available. Oh, great. So your friends,
Ma'am,
Srivastava-
the name of the book is B. Prasad.
but don't have to go. You just read Abraham. Don't read many books. It confuses you. You just read one book, and Abrahams is the original thing because it helps you. These are all the Indian authors, but it's better to go for the Abrahams because you will find good examples in that book, and very clearly it is written. So go through one book. Same thing will be written in many books. Why should you read five books for an irony or for a simile? And it is all technical terms. It's not an explanation that it will be differently explained by different authors, right? So now we go to the next main thing, that is the age of the Chaucer. Age of Chaucer. So before this, Chaucer age is the Middle English age. Before the Middle English, what prevailed was the Old English. And Old English period, that language was very, very archaic, and mostly, it was influenced by Italian, Roman, French, all these writers, the classics. So English as a form, as a language, had not developed that much, But even during the Middle English period, with Chaucer, we'll find first time we find that the English language, having its shape, having its shape. Though you'll find many foreign words, many Italian, many French words in Chaucerian poetry, but it evolved as a language during the time of Chaucer. So this age of Chaucer was an age of transition from the Old English to the Middle English, transition from feudalism to an emerging money economy. Earlier, it was a feudal world. There are either the rulers and the serfs or the slaves. There's no middle class. There's no question of free thinking. There's no question of, creating, expressing. So it was a different world, feudal world. But it was an age of transition. And due to this printing press, mostly the printing press and the translation of the Bible, people started slowly reading the classics, because translations became available in English. You learn a language when it is only in your own. For example, if I want to learn Hindi, I am only acquainted with Oriya. I don't know Hindi language. I can only have a feel of the Hindi literature if it has been translated in Odia, then I can know that this is what the writers are, this is what they have written. Or it may be translated in English. I read about Premchand, I read about other authors. Then I come to know, oh, he has written this, he has written that. Because if that language is not readable by me, I can't read it. So some classics started getting translated. So they started reading about Boccaccio, Homer, in Virgil, all these great classical writers who were not accessible to people. They started reading that because slowly the translations were available. Especially the Bible was translated. So that helped people to learn. Because Bible, if you read Bible, lot of mythology, lot of references, you get it. For example, like Ramayana and Mahabharata in epics. It is not simply Ramayana and Mahabharata, but you find the whole circles of mythology entwined into all that. You come to know many, many things about religion, about spiritualism, about the society, about the thinking of people. All these are reflected. The whole socio-economic strata of an age gets reflected through the literature. So that is why literature says is a mirror of the society. In order to understand literature, you have to understand the society. Then only you understand the literature. For example, nowadays you find the romantic movies of the old ones, like the Devanand moving around the trees, running after the heroine, singing a long, 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 unending song. So that becomes boring to the young boys, to this young generation. Because why? Because it is not a real thing happening. Please don't ask me such questions, Amrin Khanam. I'll give you 10 minutes. Please don't disrupt me when I am teaching. This is my request to all of you. If you go on asking me questions, either I answer all your questions or I teach you. Whatever is acceptable, I do that. But during my lecture, during my presentation, if you disrupt me, I cannot teach. I'm the last teacher to take a class like that. So I'm very serious about my business. I told you in the beginning that I will give you 10 minutes. So whatever queries you have, please keep them reserved for the 10-minute period. And don't disturb me. Because it is affecting the flow of my teaching. I'm getting disrupted every time I see a question popping up. Why? Am I here to answer your questions, or am I supposed to give you the hand over my presentation to you, or deliver you the lecture? Yes, okay, it's fine. Okay, so literature now becomes a vehicle of social and moral protest. So during that society and during the time of the Middle Ages, we find due to this emerging money economy, the feudalism came to an end, trade and commerce started thriving in England, people started acquiring money, wealth became important. So there was a slow rise of the middle class. When you find there is a rise of the middle class, then you find there is a thinking class, because middle class is always the thinking mass of the society. The capitalists are never the thinking mass of the society. Neither the very underprivileged or the poor are the thinking mass, because they are not in that privileged section of the society. So who are the thinking mass? Their thinking mass are the middle class. Right? So the middle class started emerging, and there was, people started from farming. Earlier it was only farming, agriculture. Started people coming to the industrial sector, to the cottage sector, to the crafts guild. People started, knowing all this. So all this question of, you can say the emergence of democratic forces also came to England. But three remarkable features of the Chaucerian age, if you say, was three things happened, three historical events. One was the 100 Years' War between England and France. Nowadays, you find the war between Ukraine and Russia, You find between war between this Iran and Hezbollahs and all this happening. But as this is the nuclear age, so it is going in a very fast pace, lot of destruction, lot of deaths are happening, tragedies. But earlier it was in a slow way. The war was going on because there's no nuclear warfare, nothing. So, but there was a lot of tension between the two countries, and this continued for nearly 100 years. So, this 100 years war was very famous, England and France. Earlier, France was dominating England, but slowly, England tried to have its supremacy over the France. And earlier it was all French literature, French, everything was in French. But slowly, English started having its own identity. Though they imitated the French classics and all, but they added the English flavor to those translations or to those adaptations, you can say. And the second thing which happened historically was the plague, bubonic plague, caused by the black rats. Many people died in England, many people died in England. And this epidemic not only was caused once, it revived again and again. One in 1361 it revived, again in 1362 it revived, in 1369 it revived, and it went on, killing many people, lot of deaths.
And by rats now?
Rats. It is called the plague, Plague. So nowadays we don't have any plague, the plague is gone. But earlier plague was like we had a COVID, it became an epidemic. And it was epidemic that gripped England. And due to this wars and all happenings, bubonic plague, yes. Due to these wars and all these insanitary conditions in the society, these rats started, the numbers increased. There are two types of rats. One is the black rat, one is the brown rat. So black rat causes bubonic plague. So they had to get the brown rat to kill those black rats. And that is how, slowly this plague was prevented, and not in a, but it was highly infectious. Plague is highly infectious, and deaths occurred in just, if it happened in one sector, in a whole thing, people perished like anything. So it was a very sporadic, you can say, sporadic disease, infectious disease, sporadically it spread. And the third thing which happened was this peasants' revolt, farmers' revolt. So three things happened. One was the 100 Years' War, second was the bubonic plague, third was the peasants' revolt. So the condition of the society was so bad, people became so poor and they had nothing. Many people died, and they had to get people from outside, to have the labor and all. So in order to increase the economy of the country, lot of taxes were imposed. Even the taxes are imposed on the poor farmers. And so that is the rebellion they had against the government, that the poor people are also being taxed. But they thought this is the way the revenue can be generated for the country. So this peasants' revolt took place in 1381, where they had to pay heavy tax. And it was all due to the financial burden of the wars, right? So due to this uprising, two people, they also, I think it was the Edward II and I think Edward II, he was, I think, beheaded by the people also that time. So when Richard II came to power, he tried to somehow convince the farmers, tried to fulfill the promises of the rebels. And that is how slowly the rebellion, came to an end. So this is, you can say, I'm talking a lot because I wanted to inform you about the socio-economic history of that period. because Chaucer belongs to that period. So this was a time of political unrest, and this was the time of where all people, mostly the people, died when posts were lying vacant, and there was no medical science. People believed more on superstition, more on this, you can say, the psychological thing, that if you have this you can have that. There's no science, growth of science and technology during that time. And so all this is how it shaped the society. So Chaucer belonged to that age. Yeah, there's a prominence of church, definitely. When, religion is always a something which I should not say, but it is the one which really dissects the society. Even now it is dissecting the society. There is only when there is a religion, there is a fanaticism also. People become fanatics. For example, during the time of Aurangzeb was very, very religious, and he was a devout Muslim. So when it comes being a devout Muslim or a Hindu fanatic, all things of, crazy things happen, as we find is happening in our country also now. I should not comment further on it, right? So this is the cultural background, and Chaucer belonged to that age. And you have the Nun's Priestess Tale of Chaucer, Geoffrey Chaucer. You have the Nun's Priestess Tale, and question comes on Nun's Priestess Tale, because time being short, I would advise you that you should focus more on, you now just understand, have an idea about the age, and then you focus what is there in your syllabus, because time is very limited for you. I'm a counselor only for 8 classes. I cannot explain the entire thing to you in that. Had it been a classroom, go slowly, step by step, I can take on the entire year I have with you. But my limitation is there, and you have your, problems also. So we have to find out a mean between that, and that is how I have to go about it. So he was a shoemaker's son, Geoffrey Chaucer. And he was appointed as a clerk first of the king's works. He was very familiar with the courtly circles of the kings. He was influenced by the French poets, influenced by the Italian poet, because that was what it prevailed that time. So in the initial stage, you'll find a lot of French influence in his poems, Italian influence in his poems. And as a poet, if you discuss Chaucer as a poet, there are some striking features about him as a poet. He beautifully combined the courtly, the court means the king's court, the courtly literature with the bourgeois literature. Because you have 2 types. One is the bourgeois. What is the other one?
Proletariat.
Proletariat, right. One is the haves, the other one is the have-nots. So he had a good feel of both, because he was very familiar with the king's court, and he was very educated also. So as a result, he knew about different literatures, and he was also very much aware of what is happening during that time, because it was also a period of transition. Things were taking a shape, and when things take a shape, that is called a state of transition from the old world to the new world. So in his poems, we'll find a lot of adventure, lot of romance, allegory, satire. Everything is mixed in his poems. Like you will find a beautiful mix of romance, lyric, drama, at times, mystical meditations. All these you'll find in his poems. And he was greatly influenced by the French and the Italian poets. So when you talk about his early poems, the first poem he wrote was, it is not there in your course, of course, but you should know that the first poem, it's a long poem he wrote, The Book of the Duchess. Book of the Duchess. Duke, the opposite word is the Duchess. Duke is the prince called the Duke, and Duchess. So this poem, Book of the Duchess, it is an eulogy. Eulogy is a praise about the Duchess Blanche, and it's also addressed to her bereaved husband because Blanche is gone, so it is an eulogy about her. That's the first poem he wrote. Second poem he wrote was The House of Fame. The spelling of house is not House, but it is Hous. This is called Old English. House of Fame. And he was very much inspired by Virgil, the French poet Virgil. He had written a classic poem called Aeneid, 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 and other medieval Latin writers. Okay, so this poem is in 3 books. Then he wrote other poems like The Parliament of Fowls. And then he wrote Troilus and Chryseidae, which is again a very romantic poem. Then comes his famous masterpiece, The Canterbury Tales. The Canterbury Tales. The Canterbury Tales, the most important section of the Canterbury Tales is the prologue. Prologue means an introduction to the tales. That is called a prologue. Every poem, every writing has got a prologue. And what is the antonym of prologue?
Epilogue.
Epilogue.
Which comes at the end of it, right? Prologue and epilogue. So the prologue of the poem is very important. And this is about an anthology of the medieval literature where he talks of a pilgrimage. It is a narrative where
29 pilgrimage and 4.
different sections of the society, cross sections of the medieval society, they come and they go on a pilgrimage. So the condition is that while they are on a pilgrimage, they will all engage themselves telling stories. So the original plan was 120 tales, but only 24 could be completed. Only 24. So the white section, cross section of English represented a knight, K-N-I-G-S-T, that means a soldier, knight, squire, doctor, lawyer, merchant, shipman, prioress, monk, parson, farmer, cook, all these people from different sections of the society, they assembled and they were going on a pilgrimage. And they told different stories in that. Different stories were told. So through these stories, it was not simply telling stories, but what was the objective of the poet? The objective of the poet was to reflect the society of that time. And that reflection of the society was not a very romantic or exaggeration, things happened, appreciation, but it was more a sarcasm of the society because things were not all right. Things were not all right. It was a period of transition. There's a lot of looting, lot of disease, lot of people cheating. When people are deprived, when people are not satisfied, what happens in the society? The society starts crumbling. So that was a degenerative thing happening in the society. So that was beautifully reflected through different stories. And the stories are like fragments. So you find 10 fragments. And in one of the fragments, you will find the non-precious tale, which is prescribed for your syllabus. So fragment 1, if you take the fragments, there is fragment 1. It talks about the general prologue. There's a knight's tale, the miller tale, and the cook's tale. Then fragment 2, then fragment 3, you'll find the wife of Bath, prologue and tale is happening. Then fragment 4, the clerk's tale, the merchant's tale. Fragment 5, the squire's tale. So this continues. This continues. And it's very ironical. It is like a portrait. We have a galaxy of characters coming and going. And everyone is trying to, what you can say, trying to tell something where it talks mostly about quarrels, disputes, sex, deceiving. Generally, you'll find the temper of the stories is like that. So, through the stories, Chaucer wants to unmask, not a mask, unmask the real.
The hypocrisy.
Unmask means trying to bring out the within of the person. Always, we try to wear a mask. What you are not the real self. When you are sitting in a classroom, are you the real self? No. You are the conscious self. You know how to talk, you know how to behave, you know how to do this, how to do that. So that is a mask. Everyone wears a mask in the society. So the true self is within the mask. What am I? I'm the real person. I know myself. What am I? But others don't know. Usually you'll find the poet always wears a mask. And through masking the characters, it tries to portray and tries to bring out what is the real self hidden behind it. So the narrator of the poem, the narrator of the entire stories, is always present. He's like the host. And it is called, if you take the structure, if you take the structure of Canterbury Tales, you'll find one is the general prologue, second is the tales, and the third is the talk on the road. That means where the host will dominate the talk and he will start linking the tales together. Like a sutradhar. When you see a drama, there is a sutradhar. Especially when you read the Shakespeare's plays, there is always a Shakespearean voice prevailing in those dramas through some character like a fool or some clown or something, but is always the voice of a playwright. So here also you will find the talk on the road where the host will dominate. The host will tell who is going to tell the next story, linking the stories, and that is how these tales continued. Now
Yes, ma'am, Harry Bailey.
Yes?
Ma'am, Harry Bailey.
Harry Bailey. What is that?
Name of the host.
Yes. And what language Chaucer used was the speech of his own time. But you'll find that is the East Midland dialect he used. But the basic line of Chaucer's verse was always a blank verse, but all the syllables ended with an E, A, B, C, D, E, or E-N. These were the inflections, E, E-S, or E-N. That is how these lines they ends with. So these are all fragments, tales, as I told you. And this is the general Canterbury Tales, the prologue of the Canterbury Tales I told, which is very important. And just a minute. Generally, people don't like Chaucer because he's an old writer, and so that becomes boring for them. They're not acquainted with the age. Everything looks different. So the century is different. So in his poems, you'll find a lot of references to astrology, mythology, these dreams, all these which prevailed during that time. Whatever had prevailed, whatever had prevailed during that time, he used to speak about that. As I told you, it is always a reflection of the society. So it is a unique medley. It is a unique medley. You cannot say that it is an epic, or you cannot say it is a single narrative, but it is all episodes, series, as you find in OTT, series, all the series. So the tales exemplify two important themes. The play. One is the human instinct. Human instinct. What is the human instinct? Human instinct is the human instinct of sex. It all goes around it. Today, if you take it, as you are all, adults, reading newspapers, seeing TVs, all these happenings around you. If you go and find out what is the real thing happening and why it is happening, it only revolves around that. There are deaths, extramaritals, deceiving each other, killing each other, and mostly you'll find either it is money or the second is sex. These are the two important things, evils of the society, for which there's a lot of degradation you'll find happening in the modern society, especially nowadays. Anytime you read the newspapers, you'll find the child rape. Anytime you find there's the brutal killing after rape. You'll find the person has deceived the person and killed her or into pieces. For what? For what? It's again it's not for a spiritual thing happening, or neither it is a quest, but it is something to deal with sex. So this is a human instinct, and that human instinct has become a very basal instinct nowadays. Of course, it is not in a stage of elevation. It has come to a very gross level now, as a result of which you will find the degradation happening in the society nowadays. And the other he talked about is the 7 deadly sins. We have 7 deadly sins: jealousy, lechery, avarice. There we have 7 sins. All these sins have been beautifully reflected, ironically dealt with slight sarcasm, at times a direct attack on them, and it is dealt with by Chaucer. So it is some sort of a human comedy. He makes this, Canterbury Tales you can say mock heroic, and it tells about a human comedy of what are the follies and foibles of human life, to which we are tempted, to which things we are tempted, to what things we can fall, below our level, to what extent, how there is so much of hypocrisy in the society, how there is so many sins committed. You'll find a nun, but she is doing whatever the opposite of it is. You see a priest, but he is interested more to make money. So they don't go by their service, or they don't go by their profession, but they go by the human instincts, which is now a fallen instinct, which is now totally, you can say soiled and spoiled and, totally corrupt, you can say. So now I think we can come to the main story we have. I've given, generally I've given you about a picture of the Canterbury Tales, and I told you that's the ironic structure of the tale, and there's a lot of wit, humor have been used by Chaucer to make the tales interesting. It tells something, but the meaning is something else. That is called irony, where you say something, but the meaning is something different. Okay, so that is a comic tone he always maintains. And now we come to the Nun's Priestess Tale, which we have in your course. Nun Priestess Tale. It is a very interesting tale, very, very interesting. And here there are 2 important characters. One is a rooster. Understand, a male hen is called a rooster. His name is Chanticleer. His name is Chanticleer. He belongs to a widow. Widow has Chanticleer, and he is very proud because he has got 7 doting wives as hens. He has 7 doting wives as hens. And the main prominent wife he has, the leading wife, like the king, main queen and the subsidiary queens. So the main queen of Chanticleer is Pertelote. Pertelote, she's a hen. So as the story begins, actually the story comes after the monk's tale. Monk was telling a tale which was very, very depressing. So the pilgrim said, no, we don't want to hear such a depressing tale. We want to hear something which is interesting. So now the priest comes and he tells, okay, I'll tell a story. And it is in the form of an allegory. It's a fable, you can say, where the animal characters are there. And the 3 principal characters are Chanticleer, who is a rooster, his wife, Pertelote, hen, and the third is the fox. The fox. These are the 3 characters. So Chaucer, this rooster, he is a dreamer, full of vanity, that he has got 7 doting wives. Wherever he goes with his hens around him. And in contrast, he belongs to a lady, an old lady, who has kept all these hens and rooster. She is a very poor lady. She is a very poor lady, hand to mouth, a very simple and modest life she leads. So here Chaucer wants to bring a contrast of this lady with these animals. So this rooster is not bothered. And he goes around in the morning, followed by his hens, and he's full of pride, full of vanity, that I'm such a wealthy rooster. And he's at the same time a dreamer. But Pertelote, his wife, she is a very practical hen. She doesn't believe in dreams. She always tries to, remind her rooster that you are a timid character, don't believe in dreams, all these things. So one day, what happened? This Chanticleer sees a dream. And the dream is that an animal, a black sort of animal, comes and grips him by the throat and he's about to die. So he tells this dream to Pertelote that I saw this dream and all, and I got very scared, and I'm really scared. Then Pertelote just ignores and tries to slam him down, saying, you just believe in prophecies, dreams, and all this happen. But here, again, Chaucer wants to say, as that was the world where a lot of religion prevailed, prophecies, people believed in prophecies. At times, prophecy is something like we have our, what you can say, that during the Satya age, this will happen, this will happen, this will happen, an earthquake will come, asteroid will come, it will kill many, the floods will have, and it will also, the whole Puri temple will be submerged. So this is called prophecy. That means the future telling or the fortune telling, where one tells about the future. That is called a prophecy. So this rooster believed in prophecies. So as he tells this dream to Pertelote somehow just tries to snub him, saying that you're a believer of dreams. Nothing happens like that. You're always scared. But in a way, the dream was a warning, maybe a prophecy, which was, ignored by Pertilote, and also as the wife did not give any importance to his dream, so perhaps though scared, he also did not bother much. One day it so happened he was going with the hens, and the fox saw this rooster, and fox are very cunning animals, they really study a person. So he came and he found out that, yes, he found out that this this rooster, Chanticleer, is a person, is a rooster full of self pride. Is very fond of flattery. So if I flatter him, perhaps I can kill him. So he goes near Chanticleer and tells him, "Oh, you are so handsome looking. You're such a beautiful singer. I've heard you singing in the morning. Why don't you sing me a song?" The fox said. So as soon as he heard his own praise, he is a person full of vanity, as I said. He was full of self-pride, and he was bloated with pride, you can say. And then he closed his eyes, lifted one leg, and started singing. As he started singing, the fox gripped him near his throat and caught him. But this person the Chanticleer had a presence of mind also. So the prophecy came true. So immediately he just signaled him saying that you have heard my song, but you are also a great singer. I also want to hear your song. Now that I have performed, why don't you perform for me? So the fox was mighty happy, and he started singing. He left him, you caught him by the neck, he left him, and also started singing. As he started singing, the rooster flew up to the tree and sat on the branch, and then said that I'll never have you, I don't believe in you, I don't trust you. You have played a foul game with me. Best by singing me, praising me, you tried to kill me. I'll not come into your trap once more. And that is where the story ends. So this is a very simple animal fable, but these have got many meanings. Many meanings means one is that during that age, if someone has a weakness towards flattery, lot of things can happen. It has got a moral. So one should not have such weaknesses. One should be strong in life, as practical as Pertilote. And also it talks about a dream sequence. Dream that time was very important, and you find lot of elements of dream in many writings during the Middle Ages. So it has got a dream. He dreams of a frightening beast, and he tells his wife. So through this fable, Chaucer conveys a moral that one should not fall prey to such temptations like flattery, or else you get deceived in life. You should be your true self. You should be a true self, be a strong character, judge yourself. Then only you know what is wrong or what is right. That is, you wanted to say that. So this is the simple meaning of the story. Just a minute. Just give me 2 minutes. So if you go by the tale, non-priestess tale, we'll find the first 2/3 of the tale, first section of the tale, you can say, it presents a very idyllic and very romantic atmosphere where there is a lady, she has got a farm and these people belong to there. It's like a paradise where he has got 7 hens, very leisurely they live their lives. And the widow is a very simple lady. And they are full of love for each other, appreciation for each other. The second sequence is the dream sequence, where the debate on the dream illustrates the character of the cock as well as the hen. How does the cock interpret and how does the hen interpret the dream? So the hen is a practical person. She just ignores and tells that you are a very timid character. And the one, he depends on dreams. He believes in prophecies. He believes in warnings. So that is how, and he's very imaginative. He's a dreamer. So he believes in all that. And the third part is where, yeah, okay, Santosh, right, okay. And the third part of the dream is where the fox, the call fox, he comes. Third part of the story. And suddenly you will find the story becoming very fast. And there is more of action. Like long speeches are not there. And the earlier part will find the long speeches of this Chanticleer. And when the villain has been introduced, we'll find that suddenly the story turns out to be very interesting. Is out of action. So we'll find the debate of dreams, the villain coming, and suddenly the story takes a very serious turn when the animal attacks Chanticleer. But again, it is a mock heroic style. Towards the end of the poem, we'll find the serious tone of the poem again becomes very lighter. Because he wins through the power of wit. He exercises his mother wit. And then the crisis is solved. And again, from a tragic scene, the thing becomes a comic scene. So it is due to this theme of greed, theme of cheating, theme of deceiving, theme of self-pride. These are called universal themes, and it will be liked by people at all times. It will be liked by people. What is called universal? That is, doesn't relate to only one age. That appeals to people of all ages. For example, no, not the classical. No, not the classical. Seva Shakti, not the classical. Universal. For example, what Shakespeare wrote about King Lear. You know the story of King Lear, where the great king called Lear, he had got 3 daughters. Goneril, Regan, and Cordelia. And this man, King Lear, was full of ego, a very egoistic king, and that was his fault. Every man has got some weakness in life. That is what Shakespeare wanted to project. Even not only the low people, even the kings, the nobles, every human being has got a weak point in one's character. And that weak point he had named hamartia. That was the term for it. So King Lear, though a great king, but he was a very egoistic king, very, very egoistic. And when he divided the kingdom, he had 3 daughters. So he asked first daughter, how much you love me? First daughter said that I love you more than my life. But does it really happen? No, it's not true. But she said that. And the king was very happy. And he gave the portion of his kingdom to that lady. Second, it comes to the second lady, Regan. Then she says something like that I cannot think how much I love you and all this. The king was also very happy that how much the daughter loves him. And then he gave that portion, he divided that to that second daughter. Then he asked Cordelia, how much you love me? Then she said that I love you, father, but when I get married, I'll take half of my love to my husband. Which is the truth. Which is the truth. But King Lear was not used to listening to such things. So he get, very angry. And he said, I'm not going to give you anything. So he deprived Cordelia of everything. And Cordelia married a French prince and got married. And the kingdom was divided between the 2 daughters. So as he had nothing with him, first he went and stayed with the first daughter. So when he stayed with the first daughter, he realized that he is not giving any importance in his inner house. Whenever he used to call someone, they said that I will first listen to madam. Only when madam says, we'll do it. Then he started feeling very neglected. So he had a very loyal servant with him. He was called the Fool. He was called the Fool. And he is actually Shakespeare's voice. So only the one who followed him was the Fool. So he went to the second daughter's place. When he went to the second daughter's place, same thing got repeated. Then she also said, you cannot decide what you are going to do. It's my house. So, you have to somewhere make an adjustment with us and all. So it was a stormy night. And King Lear left the house of the second daughter. It was raining heavily. He was never used to such humiliation in life. And the only person who was following was his own shadow, or you can say the Fool following Lear. Then he wanted to go to Cordelia. Cordelia was, that time his husband was in exile and she was also imprisoned. When he went to meet Cordelia, then Cordelia, he sought apology from the daughter, saying that perhaps you can pardon me. I have done a great mistake in my life. So don't you think this is a universal thing happening today also? Shakespeare wrote during 15th century. But what has happened during that time maybe pertains to the kings, the nobles. But doesn't it happen in a society today? Same thing is being happening in a society. So this is called universal theme, that which is applies to all ages, to all class of society, which is real, which is true. That is called universal. It's not related to only one age. He may be belonging to a very old age, but whatever he has said even applies today. Even applies today. For example, take Julius Caesar. The treachery of a friend. Doesn't it happen? It happens. Take Othello. A husband always doubting a wife. Doesn't it happen today? Yes, it happens. He always was thinking that Desdemona is in love with someone. He was always doubting his own wife, following her. So that is also a character. So everyone has some weakness. One is having a pride. If you take Macbeth, Macbeth was a coward. He was prevailed over by his wife, Lady Macbeth. So he killed his friend, his king. Why? Because the wife said that you can have the entire thing to yourself if you can kill him. So these are the 7 deadly sins we have. Say treachery, say deceiving, say greed, whatever the name.
Gluttony,
All these names are there.
adultery.
All this adultery, whatever the names are, like 7 deadly sins, where all of us are affected by it. All of us. To some, yes, they maintain a balance. To some, they become conscious and modify them. But some pursue them like mad and create all sorts of heinous crimes in the society, in their own life also. So today, I think this is the first class. I have explained you, and the question always comes on non-priestess tale. How is it is a mock heroic tale? And I would first tell you that this is my advice, that you go to the IGNOU website, and there you will find in the students' corners the question papers. IGNOU has twice exams, so annually in a year there is 2 exams. And you have 2 sets of question papers every year. So at least the last 4 years, 4 into 2 means 8. 8 question papers you have. So now that your block, I'm teaching with this block 1, 2, and 3. Now that you have completed Chaucer, whatever the questions of Chaucer is coming, you write down in a notebook. Short notes, long questions, short questions, whatever it's coming, write down. Then you have a fair idea. What type of questions are coming? Are they getting repeated? For example, in January, or in December you have examination, in July you are having an examination now. So you'll find that whether this December thing is getting repeated in alternate years. Mostly they get repeated in alternate years. Try to observe that. So go according to chapter wise so that it becomes easy for you. So in a notebook, you write down the questions all related to Chaucer. Mostly artists is repeated on Chaucer.
Yes, ma'am, from poetry.
Okay.
Mostly artists are there.
You write down the question. You write down the questions. You see what type of questions are coming. Canterbury Tales as a narrative, the characters in Canterbury Tales, or you can say the non-priestess tale. What is the moral lesson of the non-priestess tale? What is the character of Chanticleer? How is it a mock heroic poem? There may be many questions. So see those type of questions coming, and accordingly, with one long question, which is very important, you can prepare an answer which will cover all aspects of that poem. So that whichever question comes, you can write on that. Got me? Did you get me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes.
Now I give you another, what is the time? Let me see the time. 7:30. It's going to be 7:28. Okay. So now I can, if you have any questions, you can ask me. But one by one. You had a lot of queries when I was teaching. Now that my teaching is over, now you raise your hand. Okay, Santosh. Santosh, tell me your question.
Ma'am,
Yes.
ma'am, what should be the format of the answering the RTCs?
I mean, format, what type of question comes depends on that.
No, no, ma'am. If a stanza of a poem is given, then should we write from where it is taken, then step by step, how to answer an RTC?
Yeah,
I'm asking.
is question coming for this critical appreciation from this non-priestess tell?
No, first question will be compulsory question from RTCs,
I know
ma'am.
that
For
is that.
yeah,
That is the
yeah.
question.
So
Compulsory
and
question is always about the age. It is always of the
uh,
background question. Always.
so I'm asking about the general steps. What should be there in RTCs? How we have to answer the RTC questions?
What is this RTC? Let me. What do you mean by RTC?
A reference to context means a stanza from a particular poem will be taken, and we have to
I
explain
don't
about.
think from non-priestess tale you will get a quote stanza. It usually comes from the romanticism. Romantics will come
Yeah,
from
yeah.
the.
Generally, I am asking,
But
ma'am, how
let
to
me come
answer
to
an
that.
RTC.
But let me come to that. You have just now in the first step. You have just climbed one step. You have to climb
Okay,
two
ma'am.
more steps. Then only you come to know what to do.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. Now be prepared to understand the background for any age. First, you have to read the background. That is very, until and unless you are familiar with the background, you cannot write an answer. For example, if you don't know about your age, this age, where we are showing the socio-political fabric of the society, you will ask one Caribbean person, or you will ask one person from some remote island, that tell us about India. What he will write? He cannot write anything. But when I say write about your age, about the contemporary period, you can write a beautiful answer. Why? Because you know what are the things happening around you in the society. Right? So until you are clear what is happening around you, until you know the background, things will not become clear to you. For example, when we were doing our post graduation, our professor used to read out a particular stanza from some poem, and then she used to ask us which age it hails from.
Can
Guess.
you please repeat the question?
When I was doing my post graduation, I'm telling you about when you said reference to context, that is same answering I'm answering.
ma'am.
When we were doing our post graduation, our professor used to read one passage of a poem. In the poem, the poet was not told to us who was the poet. The age was not told to us. She will just read out 5-6 lines, and then she used to ask us which age this poem belongs to. For example, I say, Madam, romantic age. Why you said romantic? Next question was, why romantic? Then I used to say, Madam, these are the features of the poem. So perhaps this, I don't know about the poet. I cannot tell who's the poet, because she will read out a very vague poem, maybe not a very great poem of Wordsworth or Keats that everyone knows. No, she will read out one stanza, but she used to ask, why you said this age? What are the features of the age reflected in that poem? So, that made us to think. For example, if I talk about T.S. Eliot, he talked about the modern society, a paralyzed society. That is what he used to call. The society is paralyzed. Paralyzed like whom? Like a patient etherized on a table. The modern society is a paralyzed society, like a patient etherized on a table. Etherized means under anesthesia. So that is the picture of a modern society. Whereas if you go to Wordsworth, you'll find about nature, beautiful, radiant. Nature always trying to preach human beings. There is a spirit in nature. There's nothing to worry. You go and relax and remember the clouds, the daffodils, the bees, this, that. Will it happen in this age? Can you do that in this age? No, because your surrounding is something different. A poet will reflect the reality of the age always. And what is the reality today? It is a ruptured society, divided selves. There's nothing to, where the nature has been destroyed, molested, trees cut down, forest ravaged. So this is the society. So how can you write about a beautiful romantic poem where nothing exists? So you want to only reflect that society. So there is a book called Palgrave's Golden Treasury. You can write that name. Palgrave, Palgrave, Palgrave's Golden Treasury. It is a very small hardbound book, and it has poems from, not Palgrave's, P for pen, Palgraves, Palgrave's Golden Treasury. Palgrave's, yes, Palgrave's Golden Treasury, where you will find a good collection of poems from 13th century till the modern century, till the postmodern century, all poems. And it is a beautiful read. As you are not attending any class, I'm telling you advice, you please buy that book. You will have a fill of good poetry. You find Spenser, you find Chaucer, you find Wordsworth, you find Keats, you find Coleridge, all the romantics, all the Victorian poets, all the modern poets, all the metaphysical poets, everyone. All the major poems you'll find in that book. So you can keep that book whenever you want to read. Palgrave. Palgrave is the author. Palgrave. Palgrave. You can look at from the Google, find out Palgrave's Golden Treasury. You can see that book is there. Or maybe the Amazon book, you can find out through the Amazon. Get it. Yes. Yes, Palgrave's, Palgrave, Francis Turner Palgrave, Palgrave's Golden Treasury of Songs and Lyrics. Please buy that book. It is not very expensive, I think. But keep a good book. You know, you should keep good books. There was a famous essayist called Francis Bacon. He said, some books are to be kept, shelved, some to be read and digested. Whenever you go to someone's house, if you are a very educated person and you see a good rack full of beautiful books, good classics, good authors, you know, you feel happy that this man, he must be reading a lot. You look at them. But there are people who buy books, maybe read 1 or 2 lines, and they've shelved it. So some books are to be shelved. And some read, and some chewed and digested. There are certain books which you go on reading every time. You feel like reading once, again you read the second time, like chewing and digesting. But certain books you buy a book, maybe you don't like it, but you keep it. As you decorate your drawing room, there has to be some books in a shelf which are all-time classics, like all-time Lata Mangeshkar hits. She is for all time. Her music will never die. Similarly, certain books, for example, Shakespeare's collection of dramas, Charles Dickens, Sherlock Holmes. These are books which everyone would like. And you feel happy when you see some, at least 10, 20 books shelved. You are buying so much, spending money on Adidas, Nike, this, that. You don't mind buying all this. But have a habit of buying good books. Though e-book is available, but e-book doesn't give you that pleasure. As you read a book, turn the pages, dog-ear the pages, again go back, sit on the balcony, and you go to some place, read a book, or you're going by flight, read a book. That gives you a lot of pleasure. That gives you a lot of pleasure. You come to know many words. you know, hear many expressions. No, that is how your language improves. Yes, the smell of the book is also very important, you know. Turn the pages, you feel the hands as you are always pressing the mobile. If you turn the pages, that also gives you great pleasure, which you have always, all nowadays children have started forgetting. Okay, Nandini Prasad has raised a hand. Ask-
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Actually, I just want to know, can we expect any questions for this types of meters or something like that?
Which one? For?
Meters, types of
Yeah,
meters.
that will, no, that,
Iambic pentameter or something.
no, that will come as maybe as a short question.
Okay.
That this is there in the book
Hmm.
to make you familiar
Okay.
that what are the types of meter, what are the types of feet, what is the type of rhythm, you know, so that when you critically appreciate a poem, it will help you to understand. So that is the reason I gave you two important books today. One is that Abraham's book, which you should read, and the second one I told you to keep it as a book, as a treasure, is Palgraf's Golden Treasury. Two books. You keep
Okay.
it. Okay.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
So now today, have you understood, all of you?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
So
ma'am.
Ma'am, the notes.
notes for this Chaucer, I don't have any notes, but the thing is you have to give me your mail ID, one of you. After my class is over, I can send all one together at one go to you, and you get shared amongst yourself.
Excuse me, ma'am. I have a doubt.
Hmm.
Ma'am, for the examination, how many blocks must someone study in maximum? Should we have to study all the blocks?
You see, one thing I should tell you, I cannot tell you as a teacher that don't read. That will be against my ethics.
Okay, ma'am.
So if you ask me a practical question, I can give you a practical answer to that.
Okay.
The practical answer is, if you are thorough, particularly of one age, for example, you take romantic age. Any question coming on romantic age, you say, I am very thorough with that age, I can write any question. So you are certain that you can answer two questions. Okay?
Okay, ma'am.
Right. So some ages, for example, Edmund Spenser is very difficult. The Fairy Queen is there, a long poem. Even during our time, we also didn't read it. So for time, it is boring, and it is very too much of intellectualism in that poem, I can see. It's very difficult for you. So what you can do, some questions, you just, if you see the pattern of question, you'll find, if this is a long question that this time coming, maybe next time it might come as a short question, right, of that particular age.
Okay,
So
ma'am.
for example, a romantic age, a long question comes on Keats or say Wordsworth. Next time it may happen that a small question, short question may come only on Prelude, Shakespeare, or Wordsworth. So maybe the focus changes. But if you're very thorough with two particular age, say one modern age, romantic age, or one romantic age, or one say Victorian age, and a modern age, or a metaphysical age with a modern age, because modern age question will definitely come one or two, sure. Especially you have Yeats, you have Eliot, these are the two master poets, so definitely questions would come on the modern age. So if you're very thorough with the romantic age, which is not a very difficult age, and any question comes, you can answer that, then you are very sure that I can answer two questions, at least one short question, one long question I can answer. And the background question, you don't know what is going to come, you have to see how it is coming. So you have to look at that. And the third is an interpretation stanzas. You try to, yourself, you try to find out. When you go on reading, try to find out. So maybe there will be four stanzas, you have to attempt two. So you are having four, you have to choose two out of it. So if you are finding that it is coming from the modern age, especially some great poets, they usually not give any vague poets. They'll give some poems, stanzas from some, some poems which are very established, which are very good poems. Out of that, they usually give. For example, they might give Yeats. Yeats usually it comes, or it may give Eliot, or it may from romantic age, maybe from Wordsworth, maybe Keats, whatever they have. You try to what I was telling, that try to find out if there are some these passages coming. You make a list of those passages and try to find out from where it is coming, and you try to find out whether it is being repeated in every alternate year, or are they not repeated at all. You try to study the pattern of questions. That is very important, because you cannot read the entire thing within 3 months. It's difficult. I have to be very practically, I have to tell you, for the sake of knowledge, one can read afterwards. But for the sake of examination, one has to take a practical viewpoint. So this would be my approach. If I'm thorough in 1 or 2 ages, I know I can answer confidently 2 questions on that. And one will be, third is the background question, and fourth will be a short question. So you get all the questions. Did you get me?
Yes, ma'am.
So, any other doubt? I think I've cleared all your doubts in the first class. I've given you tips.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So the next class, tomorrow there is no class, day after tomorrow there is no class. So on Monday we have a class. So please come on time.
Mama, I've provided you with the email ID.
You have to give me the email ID, maybe on the chat box next class. Because for this class, I'm not going to give anything. It's not a very relevant thing. For non-priestess tale, I'm not going to give any note on that. So, Anu Pathak 91. How many now? I just give me one. I cannot go on giving to so many. It has to, you decide amongst yourself. In your WhatsApp group, make a WhatsApp group amongst yourself. Okay, that is the practical thing I'm telling you. Make a WhatsApp group amongst all your MEG1 group, and then you decide who will be the team leader from your side, who can send all this, whatever madam sends to him or her, you will get everything from him or her. That you decide, take a view, and then give it to me. Because last time it happened, I gave, and there are a lot of complaints, madam, he never gave us, this happened, that happened, that happened. So I don't want to go into all that. You first you create your WhatsApp group, and then you decide who would be the person who can give me. Now this is your WhatsApp group. That I'm not going to go into that. You create your WhatsApp group, note down that WhatsApp group, and then you exchange your views, and then find out the real person, the person who can take the leadership of sending whatever I send to all your friends. That is you go on deciding. And finally, tomorrow in the next class, you give me, madam, this is the final email ID I have. Okay? Don't take a very drastic sort of thing. Okay, this is the way. No, you will decide amongst yourself. And then you take the responsibility, because taking a responsibility is a very big thing. Right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you decide who will be a leader, you decide, and then you notify me, and then to that person, maybe 2 persons at least, 1 or 2. You can give me 2 persons' names.
Ma'am, please appoint. You please appoint 2 persons. Otherwise, people will get confused.
No. That responsibility I'll not take, because I'm not, physically seeing you. I don't know you personally. I am only listening to your voice. At least you can see me. I am not able to see you people also. So then how can I take the responsibility? Tell me. You decide amongst yourself, create a WhatsApp group, have trust on each other, and then you try a person that who will be there. Or at least if you give it to him, he can send it to your WhatsApp group. That he can do. Okay. So today we can stop here.
Excuse me,
Yes,
ma'am. Excuse me.
Tell me. Yes.
Could you please tell, if you don't mind, a few words about your professional career?
Oh, my personal career. Okay, I am Dr. Silima Nanda. And I retired as a professor. I was actually hailed from Odisha, Bhubaneswar, and my husband is a retired IPS officer. I served in the state of Odisha, serving in Ravenshaw College for 10 years, and then Ramadevi University for another maybe 3-4 years. And then I joined Indira Gandhi National Open University in Delhi. There I was into the academic administration. We have like you have Indian centers, we have centers, offshore centers, outside India. So that time we had 25 centers, and I was looking at the offshore centers, looking at all the student support services of the Indian diaspora settled outside. And my university gave me the opportunity to visit at least 14 countries from IGNOU. And I find the international scholars there, mostly Indian scholars. Mostly the Indian people settle outside, like in the Gulf, in Singapore, in Malaysia. Then I went to Nepal, I went to Ethiopia. So there's a many places I went. I found the students are very serious, very, very serious, and they do very well because they are paying 7 times more than the Indian students in dollars. Can you imagine? They are paying 7 times more in the Indian rupees. In Indian rupees, you can say,
Yes.
and US dollars they pay us.
Yes.
So they are very serious about, and most of them are into some job or something. They want to get a vertical promotion. That is why they go for management, commerce, and some students do English literature. So I have taken the classes also, and very familiar with the offshore scholars in outside India. And now I'm happily retired and settled in Bhubaneswar. Though I stayed 17 years in Delhi, settled in Bhubaneswar, and being a mother, I have 2 sons. One is in Tokyo, in Japan, and my daughter-in-law is a Japanese. And the other son is an advocate in Delhi, is married a Delhi girl. So now both of them are settled, and I am also settled, happily retired, and writing, bringing out some books. I have recently brought out one book on tribal literature. So that is how I enjoy reading and writing something. And no job, I'm not interested to serve anything more, but taking online classes, yes, I enjoy taking classes because I should be loyal to my institution, being in IGNOU for such a long time. So I never say no to anyone, so I've taken the class.
Thank
That
you.
is
very
my
much.
profile.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. So all good night. Then we can close it.
Ma'am, as I have joined late, so I want to know the name of the book, the Abrams book. Can you please provide me the name, please?
Someone had given the names, no?
No, I have not seen because I have joined late. I have been on 30 minutes.
You just go to the Google. You go to the Google. Don't ask anyone. Go to the Google and find out Abrams book. I think it is on literature, literary devices or something. M.H. Abrahams. Yes, M.H. Abrahams literary terms. Please write down M.H. Abrahams literary terms.
Okay,
So
thank you, ma'am.
Now we can, glossary of literary terms by M.H. Abrahams. Oh, you're getting response from your friends, you see. You should be happy you have such helpful friends. So now we are winding it up, okay?
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Okay then, okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay then, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night, ma'am.